Hey, folks, we're going to revisit this whole debate about shift left and shift right in the land of application security. And for a long time now, we've been pushing the notion that we should push more responsibility for securing apps as far left to the developers as we can. Uh, in this week, though, Contrast Security, who many don't probably know, came out with a solution that focuses more on the shift right side of the equation. They're putting the controls in at the runtime level. And what makes this all really interesting is the CTO for Contrast Security is a fellow named Jeff Williams, and he was one of the original developers of the original OWASP initiative. And he's basically saying this whole shift left thing isn't working. Fred, we've been having this conversation now for a while, and I wonder if AI and graph technologies might change which way we lean on terms of left versus right.
It's a good question, I think. And these guys have been around for a while, and obviously Jeff's been around for a while. I think the how do we introduce new technology to old problems is a common question, and whether or not, sort of graph and AI bring things together in a way that allow you to work on it. There's a very real value in understanding vulnerabilities in real time, scoring vulnerabilities in real time, understanding and instrumenting things that happen, in runtime. My questions are, sounds great. Last time I let a kernel engineer operate in kernel space in real time was the last time that guy was allowed to touch production. So the question I have is, this sounds really good, but everything that you touch in those spaces is highly risky things. And so when we think about AI today, whether you got an MCP server or not, the question for me is, please tell me all the information. Please make it highly available to me. Please give it to me in a way that allows me to understand the implications in the context. But please don't do anything about it, especially in this particular space. There's a bunch of companies doing stuff like this right now. A lot of startups really empowered and blazoned by the types of software that people are starting to utilize, not in large part due to AI. The questions are going to be whether or not this helps us, create more secure code over time, and whether or not instrumenting that in real time actually solves problems for incident response and vulnerability management when there is actually a current ongoing investigation.
Fair. So Mike, Jeff Williams is a friend of mine. Sounds like a song. Jeff Williams is a friend of mine. I actually sat down last with Jeff at the RSA conference. It's probably on Techstrong TV. I had a good talk with Jeff. I'm not sure you're characterizing what Jeff is saying correctly. I think what contrast is about is not necessarily shift left or shift right. It's shift everywhere. They're not saying that you should give up on the whole shift left thing, right? Because at the very heart of AppSec is sort of a shift left sort of motion where we're going to look at application security pre-deployment, right? That was kind of always a big focus of AppSec. I think, frankly, what happened, and Jeff is a friend, and I don't mean to put words in his mouth or to disparage Contrast. They're a great company. But there's a lot of companies focusing on that left side of the equation in the AppSec space. And I think Contrast is trying to stand out from the crowd a little bit and say, instead of just purely being focused on shift left, we got to look a little bit to the right. We got to look a little to the up, a little to the down. We got to shift everywhere. And so what they're trying to do is use buzzword bingo technologies like AI and graph tech, right, to take the focus wider, make that lens wider than just shift left. And it's an interesting play because Contrast in particular here is taking their traditional AppSec scanning tools and shifting right with them. So they're doing not the old vulnerability scanning that maybe I was doing, it's still secure 20 years ago, as Fred would know, or Qualys or Foundstone, that's a name from the past, EI, the streets are littered with these names. Instead of doing that sort of traditional vulnerability scanning, Contrast is taking their AppSec dynamic static scanning code scanners and focusing it down on already deployed applications and then feedback looping that into the developer into the left side of the equation to iterate and reiterate and make better applications. So it really is a shift everywhere.
Yeah, Alan, could I
Good, Ira.
yeah. So let me make a point, because fundamentally in cybersecurity, so dating myself, I wrote a report at the Pentagon on defensive information warfare. And this was in roughly 1994-ish or so. And we had a smart guy there, 1994, and it was called Defensive Information Warfare. There was nobody calling it cyber warfare, because at the time you would think that means robots are fighting. And some smart guy basically said, okay, here's what your report's format's going to look like. It's going to be protection, detection, reaction. Because protection, obviously we need it. Protection's going to fail. We're going to need detection, and we need reaction. All is part of a consolidated plan. Now, that is brilliant. We have the NIST model in many ways, which has I forgot all the 5 layers, but again, protection, detection, reaction is built in. The application security space has focused on primarily writing good application software, SBOMs, things like that. Writing, evaluating software as it's going. The fact we have a vendor, because I think this is a gimmick in some ways, but at least it's an acknowledgement as to where we need people to look. We need detection and response built into the application security market. That's not really well addressed. And, if you look at, Sunil Yu, for those of you who know him with his cyber defense matrix, where he breaks down technologies and looks at, protection. Again, it's a morning. I'm in Costa Rica, leave it at that. But, you have the 5 layers of cybersecurity, and it includes like mapping out which vendors are where. And it's good to see a few more vendors now moving into AppSec, detection, and reaction. And I'll just leave it there, because is it like a radical play? No. Is it a radical play for the AppSec market? Possibly. But we really need all vendors to be looking at this to provide comprehensive coverage, because all their AppSec will fail. Let's write better software and maybe learn from it. And if we have a left, I hate the term shift left, it's compared to shift right, but either way, we need the detection to feed back into the reaction, which is what's going to make good cybersecurity.
Here are the criticisms of the whole shift left conversation. And Jeff would be the first one to say. First of all, that top 10 list from OWASP hasn't changed in almost 10 years. It's still the same damn vulnerabilities over and over again. So that suggests that, developers aren't getting it, don't have the time for it. Secondarily, they're writing code, but, when they write the code and then by the time they get their review of the code, they moved on to their next project. And a lot of times they lose the context and they don't spend a whole lot of time on vulnerability fixing in the first place. And then the third element is, in the age of AI, we're going to have all these tools that are generating more code, and some of that is better and some of that is worse. But the people reviewing the code don't have a lot of cybersecurity expertise anyway. So there's just more of that code that's going to have issues going to find its way into the build, which means we need more help from the right side of the equation. So I think shift left is a lovely idea. And, the best vulnerability is the one that never existed in the first place. But I just don't think it's ever going to be a silver bullet or even a bronze bullet or anything else. It's just, it's a lovely idea, but it's not executable.
There's a bunch of cool elements that get tied together when you do this right. The distinction I was trying to make here is responding to the things that you find in real time is probably not the target focus here. If you thought about it, and you looked at what the software development lifecycle looks like, you look at what continuous integration and continuous deployment does, right, Shimmy? And you look at this and you say, there's a very interesting convergence of things like looking at what you get from your IaaS tools, like these guys that are moving into spaces where you say, okay, there's an SBOM here. Okay, I want to make sure that what I thought was deployed, right, is what's actually running. There's a lot of value in that. And being able to bubble up that type of information. A lot of people are working on that particular problem. And there's insights there, like you said, Mike's great point is that folks are worried about, they're not incented, right? Put your CISO hat on for a second, right, Ira? Shimmy, right? People are not incented to reduce the vulnerability count. That's not important, right? Shipping software is important. Doing it in a timely manner, making sure the trains run on time. Those are all important things. That's what drives the business. And our job is business as usual. So when we think about the instrumentation here, those are at odds. But the benefit of being able to surface what is, can be construed as a DevSecOps problem into operational hands is great. The challenge is it doesn't necessarily mean that remediation of that problem is a good idea right there. The implications can be very broad, right? And when you think about the types of testing required to mitigate certain types of vulnerabilities, some of those are, planet killers, and some of those are very easy to fix. And the challenge is understanding that. So if we're providing the utilization of AI tools that help give the context of all of that, that's super valuable. That's really important. How we triage that and who takes the actions on that, I think really makes a difference on its ability to be impactful for the business. But it's a cool set of problems, and there's a lot of instrumentation that can be brought together here. That part's exciting.
Yeah. I would, other things that I find exciting, and again, I've spoken to Jeff about this. Two things. Number one is the auto remediation of vulnerabilities in production, which is, I tell you the truth, we tried to do this at Still Secure 15, 20 years ago, and the market slapped us down pretty hard. People were not into auto remediating vulnerabilities without first testing them, right? Classic. Microsoft had Patch Tuesday, but the patches wouldn't come until 90 days after, many large organizations didn't implement them. They had to test them first. And so it'll be interesting to see the auto remediation. We've come a long way in 20 years, though, and that's the other thing that gets me excited here. Part of what Contrast is doing is using Graph and AI, is using a digital twin of the app. So in essence, what they're doing is they're taking an image of your app, running it in a sandbox, so to speak, looking for the vulnerabilities, applying the fixes, and making sure nothing breaks. Now, it all depends how good that sandbox is, right? How close does that mimic the real world? Is it truly a digital twin kind of thing? But if it is, and you could do that, hey man, that's exciting. That's exciting.
I also think not all vulnerabilities are the same, and some you might be able to auto remediate, and others are more complex. And I think we should, start to distinguish between them, because at least we can fix some of the low-hanging fruit automatically, maybe, hopefully.
I thought that's why we had the CVSS scores and everything.
Hey, so who manages CVE now? Right.
Well, it's still going to be MITRE. I think they did sign the contract, but I think there's a movement afoot to kind of really privatize it.
Either that, or we're gonna lean on the Europeans, one or the other.
Well, I mean, sorry, I'm just like hypothesizing, because I had a great response. Then you went to the whole MITRE thing, which is a nightmare. But anyway, but fundamentally, I still think cybersecurity, anybody who is relying upon perfect cybersecurity and saying somebody could write perfect code is a fool, a liar, or a combination of both. We have to go ahead. I fundamentally just say, look, I acknowledge no matter what we do, something is going to fail. And you mentioned, like, for example, the OWASP top 10 hasn't really changed over the years. And fundamentally, I don't expect it to. And the reason is I break down things into the fundamentals. There's so many fundamental ways to write code and write secure code. And if there are just so many fundamental ways to write secure code, there are so many those are essentially the same fundamental ways that you write insecure code and implement insecure systems. So we're not going to have changes over time, in my opinion, that are that radical. Because everybody's expecting a radical change from something. we have evolutionary problems in cybersecurity. And these evolutionary problems are fairly static from, moment to moment. Whether it's, again, things will fail. There is no industry on this earth which protects everything perfectly. And we need to acknowledge that. At least what I like about this is somebody's finally saying, because when somebody said shift left, the problem is when I was doing research a while back, I found a confidential document on the internet from Symantec that said 80% of spending in cybersecurity was based on shift left, all protection. Only 20% was based on detection and reaction. That's 20% of budgets really underspending, in my opinion, because things will fail. And if you're not there looking at how to make it resilient, you're going to have a failed cybersecurity program, which is a lot of what we see. So, saying, oh, all these people saying we're shifting left, everybody was doing that already. It's kind of refreshing to hear somebody say shift right, even though I fundamentally hate those terms. So, I want to hear them say, look, we're doing detection and reaction, because shift left and shift right, that could just be, teaching somebody to drive a car. I don't like that. I
just
want
a
to
lot
hear
of
people
shifts
saying
under the
detection,
bridge.
reaction. Exactly. So anyway, I'll leave it there on my rant.
All right. Hey, let's take a break because we're running a little late. We're going to come back. We're going to move off of cyber, a little bit off of cyber. Mike was, as he mentioned, was in New York City all day, all week at this Datadog conference, and we will get an update. You're watching Techstrong Gang.